Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charles Giusti. I am the prefect and top administrator of the French Southern and Antarctic lands. Today, we will talk about them, about the French Southern and Antarctic lands in general. But if you want to know more, especially about a scattered island on the research point of view. To start with, let me give you a brief overview of the French Southern Antarctic lands, and I won't be the alone to take the floor. There will be Frank Lustenberger, the Director of Environment for these territories. To give you a brief overview, I will refer to the acronym TAAF, the French Southern and Antarctic lands. They're remarkable, they're unique by their size. If we start with the Réunion island, you need to fly over 3,000 kilometers to reach these territories, and you can only access them by the sea. So you need to a ship to travel about 4 or 5 days to reach them. So as I was saying, you need to travel 2,800 kilometers, and there are different islands you might want to reach. So this distance can vary, and there are, for example, if you start from the scattered island and you want to go to the Adélie land, you need to travel 9,000 kilometers. So now I just mentioned the scattered islands that are located right around the coast of Madagascar. Now, for the southern lands, there are different islands, and among them there is the Adélie land. Now, let me give you a few more figures about the French southern lands, for example. They cover 8,000 square kilometers, and then they cover 2.3 square kilometers of sea. That is 20% of the French maritime area. That is the second in the world. We're northerners, so I will give you a comparison so that you can get a better idea of the size of those lands. So we have drawn a map of the sites covered by the TAAF, so you can see where they are located compared to Paris. So there are different islands. The Crozet Island next to Portugal. Then we can travel to Chad and Sudan. You will find other islands nearby, and then you can find our lands next to Greenland too. And if you go to the Hobart Island, you will be right next to New Scotland. These lands are scattered, and this could be a logistic challenge. These lands are quite diverse. They have different climate. They range from a tropical climate to an Antarctic area, but they all have a common point. They're isolated, they're far away from the rest, so they're not subjective to human activities, which means that they have a rich biodiversity, and they are open laboratories for the biodiversity, but also to identify the effects of climate change. Here is a short video about the TAAF. There are a few figures. Please launch the video. I think this video shows much more than a simple speech, and I'm sorry I have to interrupt it, but let's get back to the different districts covered by the TAAF. They cover about over 600,000 square kilometers, which means that it is the largest natural area inscribed at the World Heritage List, and this area is going to be extended in 2022 because the nature park will open up this area. There are many different species with pinnipeds. There are indigenous plant species, and a few years ago we carried out a work with IUCN France. So to take stock of the species that are present, there are many vertebrates that are on the red list of the IUCN. And now over to the scattered island, there's a lot of sea, not a lot of land. There are over 4,600 species. 80% of them are marine species. They are coral reefs. The area is protected from human activity, and there are many seabeds. And in this area, 70 species of vertebrates are under threat. And now over to Adelie Land. There are 19 species of marine birds with many penguins. And there are 6 species that are under threat and are on the list, on the red list of the IUCN. Consequently, one of the main goals of the TAAF is to preserve its natural heritage. And now I'll leave the floor to my colleague. He will talk about the protection of species.
Thank you, Mr. Prefet. This natural heritage site has received a strong investment in terms of conservation and preservation. First of all, on the side of the French southern territories, the creation of a fund in 2006, which concerns all the areas of this zone, Creuset, Kerguelen, and a fund for the marine part in 2016. We're working on the last file of extension that is going to cover all the waters of the area. Beyond the regulatory tools, we also have labels that have been looked at for many years. The AMSAR tool, which looks at the habitat for the wet areas, the green list in 2017, which recognized the management of the natural reserve, and the classification with the UNESCO site in 2019. All this management tool is organized within the second plan of management for the natural reserve that covers the time from 2018 through 2027. The scattered islands also are following the same path and have same classification tools. So you can see on this slide, there's an historic investment in 1975 for the tools of conservation and preservation of this area. 2021 classification of the natural reserve of the archipel of the Glorieuses last June, and as the President of the Republic announced, in the Glorieuses Island, we are aiming at classifying the scattered islands on the status of natural habitat. Some labeling tools, Ramsar label, with a huge mangrove area and a roadmap, a work plan that is underway, and that starts the management plan for these spaces that will go through 2025. So typically, the management plan makes an assessment of the various pressure that could be felt on these areas, pressures such as the global change, as I'm referring to climate change, of course, as well as on the west southern lands, then the scattered islands. The exotic species that are invading are one of the threats, exploitation of resources with targeted actions in terms of monitoring the fisheries and preventing trafficking in order to minimize as well the footprint of men on those territories, whether it is direct or indirect, throughout pollution, plastics, light pollution, etc. The management plan is articulated around several goals, but we find the same 4 pillars in terms of management of these spaces: knowledge to know how to preserve the spaces better, management the usages. So typically, and this is common to all our public policies, a management plan is based on a good knowledge of the space. And since the reserve has been created, and even before, there was a system of inventory and monitoring on the long term. This is really the cornerstone of our management action, whether it's in land or sea, on the scattered islands, or on the sub-Antarctic, to illustrate those monitoring actions and how we spread the information. The state has put in place an observatory of biodiversity that follows and monitors all the actions that are planned within this management plan, and to standardize the data. Here, for example, you see a typical sheet which is done on the Filica arborea, which is one of the only shrubs in this sub-Antarctic area, and which is being restored at the moment. This monitoring over the long term is articulated with a very strong investment in terms of research with all the partners that are mobilized, knowing that the research is fundamental research, but also at the service of the management of these spaces to improve our knowledge of the habitat and the ecosystems, and to target the stakes of preservation. Historically, on the sub-Antarctic or Antarctic area, we are working with one historical partner, the IPEN, the Polar Institute Paul-Émile Victor, which centralizes all the needs and the requirements on this area, maybe more focused on water and than on land. On the scattered islands, the organization is a bit different because it is not the territory of intervention of the IPEM. So we work on organizing a consortium of research to organize and coordinate the various actions undertaken in those spaces. The point is to improve the knowledge, to improve the management of these habitats. This historic investment, which has been going on for 50 years with these observatories to follow the species and the ecosystems. The background is the classification as a natural reserve has helped us better organize these research actions and to integrate the work of data acquisition, collection, to feed all the thoughts and all the studies that we have. I'm thinking namely about the IPCC or the IPBES, and all the works that are done on these territories contribute to those. A couple of examples to illustrate the concrete actions that are being put in place in those spaces. We have a plan on biosafety, and that's on the invasive species, whether they're vegetal or animal. We're also working on the flows that we have with these species, and a very important work on biosafety, which means that when you have access to these territories, to these islands, you can see on the picture there is a checking of all the material, equipments, and vegetal species that you can bring to those areas, to those islands, and a very strict control as the protocol of biosafety is put in place systematically. This is how to manage the introduction of species from one island to the other. Despite those very important efforts of control, we celebrated the 200th anniversary of the islands Crozet and Hélène next year, so it's an historic implantation. And with the introduction, unfortunately, of invasive exotic species, some of them were suppressed in the reserve. We have about 14 vegetal species that were completely eradicated, but not all of them can be eradicated. So we're rather working on controlling and monitoring when we can work on some space that are bigger stakes than others. Another way that we work is that we control the mammals that are introduced in the area, and that also happened with the cats and mice and reindeers. Those are the main species that we're working on. Sometimes we have possibilities of eradication. I'm thinking mostly about the Saint-Paul Island. We had some actions of eradication. When the size of the island allows, we can go for full eradication of the species, but some space, I'm thinking Kerguelen Islands in particular, which is a very big island, as big as Corsica. When we have species that are very wildly spread, such as rabbits or reindeers, we're trying just to monitor and control them and keep them in check to preserve some areas where there's some strong stakes, particularly with birds. I would like to mention an action underway, which is that we do with the OSB and Europe on the restoration of tropical insular ecosystem on the Mayotte and Scattered Island sector. And that will act as a lever in terms of the eradication, and we're trying to achieve a total eradication of the mice, rats, and cats. The environmental restoration is an important pillar. I talked about the Filica arborea, which is the shrub that is being restored and replanted in Amsterdam. We may not manage to get the whole of the vegetal ecosystem and community that we had before the arrival of men on those islands, but we're managing to recreate some patches of vegetation. So we're trying to recreate some parts of population of the Filica with some very successful examples on site. You can see on the picture, this is a plant that's being put in culture to be reintroduced in some areas of the scattered islands. Beyond the issues of biosafety and management of mammals and scientific activities, there is a whole management of the usages. You can see on the right, they are putting down some some wood path on the beach, so to avoid to trample the ground, so that protects the soil and the whole ecosystem. And also there's a whole monitoring of the scientific activities, because those lands are sites for research. So we're making sure with the Scientific Council to guide as best as possible the conduct of these scientific activities, so they have as little an impact as possible on the species and the ecosystems. Last pillar on the usages, the economical activities on the sector are quite limited to the fishery sector, particularly the lobster, the fishing, which is very restricted. the way that we do the fishing by trying to change the way of fishing, how we put down the nets, and to reduce accidents as well with the bird populations. There's an important work done with the scientific community to determine the rate of capture so we can have enough samples to feed our research. And tourism as well, which is an important topic. We have to put it in perspective in the sub-Antarctic region and the scattered islands. We had a touristic activity that is, of course, on halt because of the COVID crisis. It was already very limited and restricted. So we need to remember that the tourism topic is getting more and more important on the Antarctic area and on the Adelia land. As we have more and more tourists in this part of the world, on the subarctic area. So the Commission dealing with the Antarctic area is trying to find a way to regulate this tourism. Last point on monitoring the usages is monitoring the bases. On those bases, we don't have a permanent population. We have bases, a very limited number of them. We have one per district that shelter all the technical system, logistics, and of course the scientific community that is present on the base. So we have management plans to reduce the footprint of those bases, not to have buildings that are spreading too much, and deal with the energy production on this base, the energy consumption of these bases, using PV panels, for example, for one of those, and recycling all the waste as well. And those buildings are unoccupied as well, so we need to work on that, because everything, all the access is done by helicopter or by boat. Just a few words on the sector. The management plan goes with some success stories, and I'm going to give the floor again to Mr. the Prefet to give us more details on that. Just to wrap up, I would like to illustrate the fact that we have the guidelines that are those management plans, and it's also all the services that are mobilized, and that all aim at protecting the natural habitat, promoting research, and making the French presence an example in these territories. So we have various elements contributing to that, the logistics aspect that I mentioned, and all the logistics challenges at those for those 1,000 and Antarctic lands, 3,000 tons of materials that are being brought to those districts every year. Those are policies that are very special, like Frank said, on the exemplarity in terms of environment and environmental transition. We're putting in place a policy that addresses the National Plan for Nutrition and Health, and to reduce the meat consumption for the inhabitants. Also putting in place alternative sources of energy and renewable energy, and the waste policy. We have also many partnerships with the scientific community and the local community, the research institutes, to help us in our works. And Frank was mentioning the Botanic Center of the Mascaran, which is being very helpful in the management and the actions of restoration in the scattered island. From a legal point of view, because we regulate the activities on the ground, and also the recruitment and training, which is a big part of our plan. We have a major activity to renew the people who are in the bases. So that goes through a very important training process. We recruit 90 people a year, and we have 44 different jobs in those bases, to show you the complexity of that. Safety is also very important, and health as well. The safety of the people who are working on sites. It is not acceptable that people who go in those isolated districts remain without care, even if we have, of course, hospitals and doctors, but we want to limit the risk for someone who would come either with a medical or psychological problem. Another big stake is this surveillance to protect those spaces from illegal fishery that is very destructive, and also make sure that nobody comes and touches this land. And also an awareness program that we're trying to do every day on the actions that we take and the contribution that those French Southern and Antarctic lands have in terms of biodiversity. It is very interesting to watch some young students from high school or colleges to come and watch for themselves these territories. Thank you for your attention, and I try to concentrate all the stakes for those French Southern and Antarctic lands in a few words. Thank you very much. So I'd like to invite Mrs. Chabana to have a seat, Sophie and Frank. So we're going to talk about the research in the scattered islands, which is quite a big work for us that we've been doing with the Ministry of Research and all the research institutes, but the OFB, the AFD, and the National Agency for Research. So I'd like to make a quick introduction, and then I'll move on. I'll give the floor quickly to Sophie Marinès, Pascal Chavanès, Sophie Marinès, sorry, who's in charge of the scattered islands at the direction of state, Madame Chavanès, who's the director of the IFD. Thank you for talking to us about this project in the scattered islands. So very quickly, for those of us who you were with us before, just a few numbers. 2,300,000 kilometers, square kilometers, territories within which there are some districts going to polar to tropical, and land spaces that are quite limited, 700,000 kilometers, and Kerguelen is about the size of Corsica. For the other ones, it's mostly marine space. So I'm inviting you to watch a quick movie on the research on the Western Territories.
La position géographique des terres australes françaises et leur isolement en ont fait très tôt des territoires de science. Historiquement, ces travaux ont d'abord porté sur la géophysique et la météo, des champs d'études qui demeurent très actifs.
Les types d'observations qu'on va conduire sur ces espaces, ça va être des observations qui touchent à l'atmosphère. On va observer la très haute atmosphère, on va observer à Amsterdam par exemple l'évolution du gaz carbonique dans l'atmosphère. On va étudier les tremblements de terre, on va étudier le magnétisme terrestre. Tout ça, ce sont des observations à très long terme pour comprendre le fonctionnement de notre planète sous l'aspect vraiment physique et chimique. Après, ce sont des territoires évidemment très importants pour les sciences du vivant.
Dès les années 60, des programmes scientifiques se sont orientés sur l'étude des animaux, des plantes et plus largement des écosystèmes austraux. Aujourd'hui, les chercheurs ont accumulé une connaissance très pointue de ces milieux terrestres avec une profondeur de données remarquable.
On est dans une situation exceptionnelle, on le voit ici, c'est des animaux qui sont absolument pas farouches, donc c'est une situation qu'on ne retrouve quasiment nulle part ailleurs. C'est des îles très isolées, les animaux ont évolué en l'absence de prédateurs, et ça nous permet de réaliser ces suivis à long terme, ces captures, recaptures, année après année, au cours des 60 dernières années, et d'étudier la dynamique de ces populations sur des périodes aussi longues.
So this is about the Western territories, the Southern, and Antarctic territories. So the scattered islands constitute an open sky laboratory that is equally as interesting as the Austral area. In terms of research in those territories, you have the Antarctic and subantarctic that has been seen some research for a decade, which is the Institute, Polar French Institute Paul-Émile Victor, and the museum, the Natural Museum, the Museum of Natural History. We are looking at a plan that needs to be consolidated. We have some initiatives, of course, and the stake now is how to structure all this research and exchange and change gear to increase the ambition and the number of scientific programs that we have on the long term on the scattered islands. The scattered islands, in a few words, we've talked a lot about Austral lands. It's again a lot of sea, not a lot of land. Stakes that are very particular, which are the coral reefs, that represent 750 square kilometers. That includes mangroves and other spaces of low depth. It's an economic zone of 641,000 square kilometers. A general stake for research that is quite interesting, maritime borders that are common with Free State. We're not in the middle of nowhere. We are bordering and neighboring Madagascar, Mozambique, Comoros, and Mauritius. All of that creates some sovereignty challenges and conflicts sometimes. And in terms of protecting the space and research, a necessity to work together. The scattered islands, because they are protected, are sanctuaries, particularly for the reproduction of certain species. For example, some sharks. So this is form of sanctuary in a space that is very anthropized, with particular threats and particular types of pressure. I now want to give the floor to Sophie Marines, who will talk to you in more details of the first results of the research conducted there. Thank you, Mr. Prefet. Hello, everyone. So the territory of the TAAF, these western and southern territories, have been helped with by the operator, which was the Polar Institute. When the scattered islands were joined to the administration of those territories, the question was raised, how can we help the research in these territories around conservation, climate? And this initiative was carried collectively by the TAAF and the French research institutes that sat down around the table, the CNRS, the scientific committee, but also some universities, more local universities, with the university from La Réunion and the training center of Mayotte. They gathered and they tried to identify a strategy to conduct and guide research in those territories. They met within a consortium, and the goal of this consortium is to identify the priority path of research, so how to back some projects, to have access to the territories, and to pull the results. There's a very big stake at the moment to pursue this dynamic, but also to bring it to the next level, to the local stage. Mr. Prefet said it early on, the environmental challenges and the knowledge challenges of this part of the world are shared with the other countries in the area, and they can only be solved through this enlarged dimension. So this structuring within the consortium was done around the steering committee, bodies that brought financial support to these projects, the scientific committee, and a coordinator, which was the CNRS at the beginning, which between 2011 and 2014, and that will end in 2020 for that second session. It mobilized a budget of about 1.2 million euros, to which you can add another donation in terms of logistics or human resources. So in few numbers, what is this consortium about? Since 2011, what happened? 32 scientific projects have been selected and implemented in the territory throughout two calls for tenders. One is pluridisciplinary in 2011 and the second one in 2017. 12 international collaborations. These are local, national teams that are mobilized, but also research labs that signed up, people from the States, from the Indian Ocean, Europe. 17 research structures are applied with the researchers, and over 180 researchers that worked either on the field or in the laboratories on these research projects. There's a major logistics aspect, which is to pool all the data and the access to the territory. Over 80 campaigns on the ground have been conducted since 2011, mostly with the mobilization of the armed forces, which provided some military planes, National Marine, and also the mobilization of Marion Dufresne, who did 2 campaigns around these territories, which serve as a platform to gather all the researchers. On the infrastructure point of view, there's been the implementation and the improvement of the infrastructures to welcome people. It's quite rustic. There's some military buildings. So there was, the installation of research stations that allow the researchers to work in good conditions in each of those scattered islands. So what are the major subjects studied? The scattered islands are observatory of climate change, but also laboratories to observe biological diversity and the ecosystems that are not very anthropized, so submitted to very low pressure. Also, the ecosystems of the scattered islands are connecting to the ecosystems of the neighboring islands with the neighboring territories of the area, and the coastal and deep sea ecosystems. So a few numbers again. The feedback in terms of scientific production from this consortium for these 2 first phases. There's been 72 scientific articles published in scientific public magazines. Most of these articles came from the first consortium, because we know the long time that it takes to publish any scientific data, and Pascal Chabanet will tell us more about that. There have been some collaborations between these different research teams, 60 new collaborations between scientists from different labs, and about 20 of collaborations with the states. And you can see them in this World Congress of Nature, because all those research programs can bring some key tools for the management of territories, and there's been a lot of conventions and agreements to work most specifically and implement conservation programs. There was also a dimension in terms of training around this consortium, because it involved 90 students either on the ground or in labs throughout PhD or postdoctorates. So the consortium and the mobilization of all these projects has also worked as a lever effect, and some of them got some financing, and that's why we need to change gear and get some more funding, European programs to complement the finance research fund that are already in place. So that increased the scope of the programs that were first initiated. In terms of scientific results, I will let Pascal Chabanet present the program, but I would like to draw you a recap. It's absolutely not exhaustive, But the types of result that came out of these first sessions of projects, first of all, it was mostly an investment in terms of ecology and environment, work on insular tropical ecosystems with a descriptive approach, taking stock of what is there with 3,000 species for those territories. We don't talk about new species, we talk about the existing species, 4,000 marine species. Most of them were identified with these programs. It also confirmed the state of conservation that is particularly strong, particularly in the area of the Mozambique Channel, on coastal ecosystem, mangroves, and the land ecosystem. Also showed the strong connection and complex connection that exists between these different territories, between the scattered islands, but also between the islands and the coastal neighbors, all the East Africa, Madagascar, Seychelles Islands, with very close links among the populations, whether it's migratory birds or other species. Major programs were done on the impact of climate on the biodiversity and some forecasts on the future climate, but I'm not going to get into details, and I'm going to let Pascal Chabanet present it. I just want to say that it probably triggered the observatory on the long term on the scattered islands, the idea to have classified territories over the long term. There's been some studies done on anthropic impact because of the presence of men on those territories. There has been in the actual consortium a study on plastics that showed that even in those isolated territories, there's a very sad observation that plastic is still there, managed to get there. There was also this assessment of illegal fisheries that was done with programs of halieutic population and the implementation of of the presence of invasive species, exotic species. And to conclude, I would like to insist on, in this context of World Congress of Nature, the various bridges between those results to the benefit of the management of these territories. All these issues of inventories and assessment versus the rest of the biodiversity, local and global, has contributed to classify these territories as protected areas and to draft management plans to protect these territories. And more technically speaking, more specifically speaking, we did some engineering and worked on the restoration of the sites. I talked about the introduced mammals. Some research programs showed the impact of the species that were introduced, such as rats, on the population of protected bird population on some islands. Over 10,000 birds were impacted and directly killed by rats or cats on the island, so there's an emergency to act. The conservation programs were put in place on the basis of this data. It's the case of Tromlin, where the rats were eradicated in 10 years, and on this island where there were 2 species of marine birds, the programs witnessed the facts and the impacts on these insular ecosystem, and those 2 species of marine birds, there are 5 more that came and settled on this island. So, and the existing population was multiplied by 10, so there's a very positive and encouraging effect on biodiversity if we work hand by hand on these programs. So I want to go a bit further, and I want to say that these programs allowed the production of a draft paper on the impact of the eradication of the mammals that were eradicated and the well-being of the bird population and the coral reefs. And these works were also done on not only on the scattered islands, but on the Seychelles and other islands. So we're moving on quite nicely on these conservation issues. I'm going to give the floor to Pascal Chabanet.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Pascal Chabanet. I'm a biologist. I am the research director of the RRD. I am specialized in coral reefs. I live in the Réunion island, and I was lucky enough to take part in the first research carried out on coral reefs in a scattered island a few years ago. But that's not why I'm here today. I would like to present the research carried out by one of my colleagues. She ran a project financed by the consortium. Could you give me a microphone, please? This research is called Impact of Climate Change and on coral reefs, low anthropogenic, low or human-induced impact on coral reef. So we analyzed the impact of climate change on the sea as well as on the land, climate change that is felt through the sea temperature rise. So you all know about this, and in 2021 there was 50% more CO2 in the atmosphere compared to the pre-industrial levels. This phenomenon has dramatic consequences with the global warming of the seas, and that's those are the two criteria on which the program focuses. So we work on the impact of climate change on the scattered island. It's already been mentioned, but I'll repeat it. There are no inhabitants. They are inhabited islands, so we can study the effects of climate change without having to deal anthropogenic factors. We monitor temperature along the Mozambique Channel. And we have a very interesting area covered, and last but not least, there's a really rich biodiversity with, among others, a coral reef. And Sophie mentioned remarkable figures about the biodiversity there. And this program aims to study the warming and the acidification patterns that have been identified this past era, during the Anthropocene era, in the southwest of the Indian Ocean. That is an area that hasn't been much studied since. There were only two oceanographic campaigns that were carried out in 1963 and in 2004. We want to monitor the past and present effects of climate change. In order to do this, we study the major CO2 processes involved there, and we also study the erosion of corals by bioeroders factors. This project was started in 2019. There were two campaigns. One was carried out in 2009, another one in 2011, and we benefited from the support of the armed forces. So we thank the armed forces because it was a really useful support. And on this picture, you can find all the parameters, the criteria we have used. CO2 is one of the parameters that we have used in order to carry out our study. You can see the CO2 factor on the blue line. Data was collected by a ship, and then we also make measurements on the island, on the land. And among the indicators we use, there is the temperature, the salinity, and you can find there's a measurement point in red on the picture. In the water column, there are other measurement, and here it's more about the chemical aspect of and chemical dimension of the area. So there is a continuous pattern, as you can see, and there are, in addition to that, some other measurements that were made in depth under the ocean. There is also a measurements were also made with the help of corals. As you might know, corals are like trees, and you can determine their age. And we also study corals thanks to isotopes, and we use different characteristics in order to track down the history of the coral. And Eileen has also made some studies. She took cement blocks on coral reefs. She put them there, and during the second campaign, second field campaign, she collected them and studied them. The cement block. Here are the result of the study. As you know, we always need a lot of time to analyze data. Although a report was just published about the deep sea research. So here are a few graphs. The horizontal line is the area, represents the area, and the vertical line represents the indicator we used. There are different indicators used, such as CO2 or salinity. So you can see the different curves we obtained. There are data dating back to 53. That is really precious data, and the yellow line refers to more recent data, and the same goes for the blue line. The surface temperature is variable. It has increased by 1.5 degrees every 50 years. That's a lot. As for the CO2 parameter, the so-called fugacity parameter, you can feel the effect of CO2 emissions. And salinity has been subjected to high variation on the 2019 blue line. If you look at the red circle, you can see there was a decrease in salinity because there was a storm called Ida that was there in 2019, and it impacted the salinity of Jean Nova, that is the place in between Madagascar and Africa. So as you can see in the red circle, there were a lot of variations for salinity, and the same goes for the acidification. The pH has accelerated these past 20 years. From the south towards the north, and what you need to know is that temperature also impacts pH. The scattered island coral reefs are under threat, but that's the same goes for the rest of corals worldwide. We still don't know what will be the impact of climate change on coral reefs in the scattered island. So if I had two things to tell you today, if there were two things I would like you to take home is, first of all, the observatory that we have set up to study the impact of climate change on the scattered island, and the scattered island provide us with very specific and precise models. We can have a targeted approach to climate change. And the second thing I would like you to take home is about regional cooperation. We share an ocean that is the western part of the Indian Ocean, but also the Indian Ocean as a whole, and we cannot work separately around this Indian Ocean. So it is crucial we enhance our cooperations as we face the same challenges, whether we are a developed or a developing country. Everybody will be directly impacted by climate change, and we need to be prepared. Thank you for your attention. I have 1 minute to tell you what I came to tell you. We are working on the second consortium and on the results we got. Obviously, there have been warnings sent at the national and international level in order to enhance our protection targets, to make them more ambitious. And now, what are we going to do? Well, following the announcements made by President Macron in the Glorioso Island in 2019, he announced the creation of a national nature park in the Glorioso Island. It was then made possible last week with a decree. They are objective as pertaining to the Glorioso Islands. With the President Macron wants all the scattered islands to be part of a nature park. We have extended the protection to all scattered islands, and we want to renovate the scientific station of the Glorioso Island. That was done in 2020. Now we have a scientific center that is quite, that is not huge, but that is there, and that is enough for operators to carry out their work and their studies. And finally, we will enhance mobilizing international and regional scientific community. As you see, the local international dimensions are really important. So to conclude, we are working right now. We are trying to take stock of the second research consortium. We should receive the latest results very soon. The consortium will publish its results by the end of the year, and we are preparing for the next consortium with 2 research topics. First of all, diversity, monitoring environment and species. Secondly, monitoring the impact of climate change on these areas. Pascal Chabanet underlined that we need continuity in the work of the observatories, and this is the working model we want to use because it provides us with interesting results. We want to structure and to connect ecosystems. We work on areas where there's fishing. If you were there during the last session, you heard what we have done about fisheries, and this work we're going to carry it out with our local partners, and we also need to undertake research to improve our management and preservation practices. Let me remind you 2 important elements. We hear a lot about the Science 2.0 that could help reduce our impact on these isolated areas. And so this new science could prevent us from being too intrusive. And this could help us reduce our impact in secondly, we also work in field of open science with all our partners of the second consortium that is about to end. The next consortium is open to new partners. It will be launched in 2022. That was the conclusion to this presentation in a little less than 1 minute. If you have questions, we are here and we'll be delighted to answer them. Thank you very much for your attention. We have to leave the premises for the next session, but we have a stand at the nature area, or we can discuss. We can talk here. Thank you.
1, 2, 3. Can everybody hear me? So hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for the French Pavilion to host us for a special presentation. We are not going to talk about biodiversity, but we wanted to present to you the actions put in place to make this Congress an eco-responsible Congress. To introduce this presentation, I'm going to give the floor to Mark Strauss, who's a project of international events on biodiversity. Thank you, Olivier. It is a very important time for us in the lifespan of this project. From the get-go, we wanted it to be eco-responsible. It's a requirement because since the COP21, and I greet Pierre-Henri Guillard, the former Secretary of State, who's now the ambassador for the protection of the rainforest. And at the time with the COP21, we were the first ones to introduce the certification ISO 21 in a major event organized by the French authorities. And since then, it's impossible to organize such an event without having it. So it became something obvious from the first minute when we start working on this project. And we wanted this project to be eco-responsible and respectful of sustainable development. It is not a certification just to look pretty and have a diploma. It's to really cover all the aspects of sustainable development in a very systematical way. Whether it's inclusiveness with the association of the big public and all the stakeholders, because we wanted this event to regroup as many people as possible. So the project ecosystem is very rich and complex. It is not a top-down style of project. It is, of course, a co-construction with the IUCN, local collectivities and NGOs. We also wanted to cover all the aspects, cleaning, restoration, frugal behavior with energy, sophistication of the materials, a procurement strategy that is responsible, with some clauses on the materials that are being used and recycled, and also in how we grade our suppliers. It depends, of course, on the tenders, but we're often looking at a type of rates that are 20-25% for the criteria of sustainable development. So it is really at the heart of our policy of sustainable development. This is also a course that we had to hold because we're doing sustainable development in the context of a pandemic, which is not so favorable. So we had to mitigate that aspect of things, the plastic side of the pandemics that the pandemics imposed to us. And I will let Pamela and Olivier get into details, but my message is quite clear. We cannot hold such a great event without having a proper strategy of sustainable development. It has to be thought, organized, steered by all the teams. It has to be systematic, it has to be documented, it has to cover all the areas, and it has to be conducted with a sense of adjustment to circumstances, but without making any sacrifices on the objectives that we're trying to reach. Thank you, Mark. Yes, this Congress is following up after the great French events that are eco-responsible. It is also a Congress that addresses very strong requirements from the IUCN, and I will now give the floor to Pamela Grasvan, who is manager of the Congress, of the IUCN Congress, and this is her 4th IUCN Congress, so she knows what she is talking about. Pamela, you have the floor. I confirm to you, I never lived such a Congress. It's very particular for all of us. The sustainability aspect is at the heart of the IUCN mission. Considering the goal that we have as an organization, of course, it translates into everything we do, including the operation and management of our events, and this one is one of the biggest one that we hold every 4 years, and this one is actually has been held 5 years after the last one because of the situation. I would like to thank the ministry and all the local actors who helped us throughout this event. It's the 4th Congress that I'm doing, and I can tell you that the commitment that we've seen on the part of the French actors is quite exemplary. What we're trying to achieve with the sustainable approach to the Congress is to increase the goals and all the aspects of improvement. Things are different from one country to the next, so of course it makes the eco-responsible approaches difficult to compare from one Congress to the other because the situation differs. What is a shame in a way, because we can't always build on the aspects that we started building on last time, because some things cannot be passed on from one place, one geography to the next. But it also makes the organization more challenging because stakes are different, solutions are different, the partners have new ideas. And for us, what is really important is to leave a legacy. It's not just to go to a city or a country, organize an event. The actors make a bit of an effort for the Congress, but then everybody forgets about it. For us, it's really important that we manage to convince our partners and find solutions that can be continued once we're not here on the ground with our Congress, but something that is going to stay, either for the site that is hosting the Congress, the hotels, and all the local actors involved. So we were quite well surrounded. I want to thank Jérôme Lafage to challenge us as well, because it helps us sometimes to accept new ideas, to welcome new ideas for the Congress here. What was particular was the sanitary restrictions with the COVID situation, which brought some challenges that we never had to face before. Another aspect which is particular to this site is we have several halls, so we had to build some rooms, which is something that we never did before in previous Congresses. And another aspect for this one was the new policies and strategies in terms of anti-harassment policies and gender parity. I am very proud and happy of what we have achieved. For the last Congress, we've implemented for the first time the ISO 21 strategy, and this time the approach is a bit deeper. to really back the project from the beginning. So I think we've really built something that was very efficient and positive. What really impressed me is the sustainability aspect was included in every contract, every agreement with all the suppliers who work with us. And I really want to thank everyone, the Safim who welcomed us here, and all the other suppliers with whom we worked, who are really playing the game and playing their part. Of course, there's always room for improvement. It's an ongoing process, but I believe that we've had a good first approach to make sustainable events for other actors and or organizations who will come after us. So I'm going to let Olivier give you more details on what we've done.
Thank you, Mark and Pamela. As you can see, there was will, there was a vision. We just needed a way to reach our goal. As Pamela said, we chose the ISO 20121 method, which means that we applied sustainable development principles for a long-lasting events. There are 300 structures that are certified in the world, so we're really proud to have so many structures that are certified. We have drafted a sustainable development policy, and doing so, we were provided guidance by the various stakeholders within the ministries, the collectivities. We listen to all our partners in order to identify 4 challenges: environmental challenge, an economic and social challenge, a challenge in terms of heritage, and of inclusion. So what happened on the ground? We drafted an action plan with 115 actions that was supported by all stakeholders, that is collectivities and the different ministries. I would like to pay a tribute to the 4 collectivities that helped us: the Region South, the Bouches-du-Rhône department, the Métropole, Aix-Marseille, and the municipality of Marseille. They played a crucial role in the actions undertaken for sustainable development. They helped us in different fields such as transport and waste recycling. I would like to give you more details about the different actions carried out. Among them, there was the minimizing the carbon footprint of the Congress. We used the CSR directive where they were implemented on the market. They were assessed so everybody could be held accountable. And 90% of all materials and equipment that were used, that were rented, or that would be reused at the end of the Congress. So we made many efforts to limit the packaging plastic and the paper we've used. As for transport, we chose to hold our Congress in Marseille, and we chose the Parc Chanot area because it was really accessible. It could be accessed. It was accessible with public transportation. And we also created a network and solutions for the trucks that came from Paris to set up the exhibition. 100% of the energy used on the Congress premises is renewable, and a large part of residual carbon emissions will be compensated. So there we hear a lot about carbon emissions, but it is useful to specify on which area, what is the size of the area involved. So here we are at the World IUCN, this global IUCN Congress, along with partners that are committed to biodiversity. And I do hope that there will be more specific actions. We have tested some solar panels on police vehicles, for example. Many efforts were made to ensure a sustainable food. I'm sure you've noticed, and it was articulated around a sustainable food charter that planned for 70% of all food to be organic, and we didn't know the fish used and sold during this Congress doesn't involve any species under threat, and that can make restaurants operators, that make it difficult for restaurants to provide fish. We have set up compost stations in all restaurants, and so whenever you get a meal at one of the restaurants, you get some plates and forks that can be compostable. Food surplus, food excess have been given to association, and more specifically association that support women, since we also support the label for the equality of men and women. There are many water fountains in the Congress. I'm sure you've seen also the water bottles and the glasses that are available, so that everybody can top up their glass, top up their water bottles. We don't use single-use glasses. We have used 12 stations to. We have set up 12 selective sorting stations, and here we can also you can also throw bio waste. We have made many. There have been many innovations in this Congress, and I'm sure they'll be used again in other editions of the Congress. They're really important to challenge the way we use, the way we manage waste. On the local level, we have offered a few trips, a few activities, so that participants can discover the area, an area that has many riches, and obviously the French Pavilion has been a key in promoting the local heritage as well as the French one. We also focused on inclusion. That's one of the major aspects of the Congress. There were nature 2050 space areas. These areas were key, and we set up a local and national communication network so that as many participants as possible could come to the Congress. And we wanted participants to be interested to be familiar with the topics addressed during the Congress, but we wanted also to reach out to people who weren't familiar with these topics. We also set up a transport network so that everybody could see the nature network areas. And obviously, we complied with a label called Égalité Grand Événement. It's been here, it's been around for a long time, and the Ministry of Ecology really cares about it, but wanted to go further. We wanted more equity, equity between men and women, more equality within our teams. We also wanted to tackle the living conditions of women in the different areas covered during the Congress. Furthermore, we also set up a system thanks to which you can report any emergency or difficult situation. Finally, there's a last dimension I haven't talked about. This Congress is a large event. There are many means. We have also used another dimension. We took heritage into account. There's a long legacy for the Congress. This Congress could have stayed the standard IUCN Congress, the IUCN Congress, the version we've always known. But we wanted to create a village for biodiversity, a biodiversity nature that is the Espace Nature. And in order to do so, we have covered 2,000 square meters. There are many school activities that were organized, and we did so in order to leave a trace so that the municipality can keep the continuum. And thirdly, we wanted to, we have a legacy in sustainable practices. Let me give you a few examples. During the Congress, many actors have been ISO 20121 certified. The municipality of Marseille made many efforts for the Clé Verte hotels of the city to be labeled, to be certified. Many of them are being certified. Some of them are already certified. And we have many restaurants present during this Congress, and all the restaurants that work within the Congress will have a label called Ecotab, and they will benefit from this label for 1 year after the Congress. Finally, we have a legacy of partnership on the territories. Either because we've strengthened existing partnerships or because we've created new ones, and I hope they will keep on flourishing. Let me give you an example that is a great example. We have been active in the area of waste management along with the local collectivity, but some private businesses have also taken part in the process, and along with organizations like Les Alchimistes, and along with 6 other partners, they have been working on waste management, and they set an example. Among our partners, there is one we wanted to distinguish because they have worked on the Sustainable Action Plan directly. And here's a short video.
Je suis Claire Martin, directrice RSE du groupe CMA-CGM. En tant que partenaire, CMA-CGM compensera 100% des émissions de CO2 du Congrès mondial de la nature. Ce congrès a été pour nous une formidable occasion de mettre en avant les actions portées par notre groupe pour améliorer de manière concrète la performance environnementale de l'industrie, du transport et de la logistique. En tant que groupe mondial très attaché au territoire de Marseille, nous avons également pu mettre à l'honneur nos partenaires locaux qui agissent quotidiennement pour la préservation de la biodiversité.
CNR est une entreprise qui gère le fleuve Rhône, qui produit des énergies renouvelables issues de l'eau, bien sûr, mais aussi du vent et du soleil. La centrale qui permet d'alimenter l'UICN en énergie est la centrale de Bolène. La centrale de Bolène est d'ailleurs située en plein cœur de la réserve de chasse et de faune sauvage qui figure sur la liste verte des espaces protégés de l'UICN. En garantissant la provenance renouvelable, locale et durable de l'énergie qui sert par exemple à diffuser cette vidéo, nous soutenons pleinement l'action du ministère et de l'UICN pour un événement éco-responsable. Et nous cherchons à souligner l'importance d'une transition énergétique qui permet non seulement d'éviter l'émission de gaz à effet de serre, mais aussi à préserver la nature ordinaire et extraordinaire qui accueille nos espaces de production d'énergie.
Améliore Fila, directrice utilité sociale et sociétale pour les connexions. Le rôle de notre association Les Connexions sur le Congrès mondial de la nature, c'est la prévention et la gestion des déchets, en lien avec différents acteurs. Le congrès a été l'occasion d'innover pour nous en matière de pesée et de traçabilité. Innover aussi en travaillant main dans la main avec un prestataire de nettoyage et un gestionnaire de RP, en l'occurrence Humid et la Safim, et de tisser de nouveaux partenariats avec des associations pour nos actions de dons alimentaires.
Pour cet événement exceptionnel, nous avons créé des points de distribution d'eau sans contact et nous mettons des éco-cups réutilisables à la disposition des congressistes et des visiteurs. Aix-Marseille Métropole œuvre au quotidien pour la préservation de la nature. Grâce à notre sobriété énergétique, nous traitons et nous distribuons l'eau avec un service zéro carbone. Pour nous, acteurs engagés sur notre territoire si précieux, être partenaire au Congrès mondial de la nature de l'UICN, c'est tout naturel.
Thank you very much to all our partners and to all their teams and our teams who contributed to putting in place on the ground very concretely this sustainable development policy. And to conclude this presentation, I will give the floor to Mr. Thierry Geoffroy from the FNOR, because he audited us on the gender parity label and also on the ISO 21 certification. Mr. Geoffroy, you have the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, hello. So we just gave these two certificates, the ISO 2021 and the label on gender parity. It's a huge work because when you walk around and you go through the various alleys, you just see the tip of the iceberg. But for many years and many months, there's been a huge work being done without which the success of this Congress would not be here. It is all the more important that it was postponed a few times. We are in a Congress in the context of a sanitary crisis. So I would like to underline, Mr. Secretary General, the very intensive work of the team that put in place this device, which is a very strict device with indicators, monitoring indicators. and that, according to the rules of the ISO, progress are in constant progress. I would like to underline as well the work that we've done during our previous audits with the IUCN, which is for us a stakeholder, and that was very smooth and very efficient. So all of that leads today to the award of these two certifications. It is not by chance. We come here, we check, we come back and we check again. So everything that you've seen, I guarantee you today that it corresponds to the reality. And it's not something that hasn't been checked thoroughly. You can see a few examples of that. And I would like to just say a few words on what we particularly interest us in this certification with the audits that we conducted on the ISO 2021, which is the fruit of many years of many countries that produce what is the best in terms of regulations on sustainable development. It is 115 actions. It is an eco-conception that is done upstream. And we can see that, the French Pavilion. You could see the wooden doors and the floor that you're sitting on or standing on is eco-conception, is also material that will be recycled. The chairs on which you are sitting are not going to be thrown away after the Congress. So this is a very important aspect. You've talked about the work was done with the stakeholders and territorial actors, volunteers, and that leads to a remarkable event. On the label, on the gender parity for a big event that was awarded for the first time on the G7 in Biarritz, on the request of the president. This is the same thing. These are very concrete actions, and there is a cell, I'm sure you know about it, that works and acts against harassment. The concrete evidence, you have it on you, is if you look at your badge, you have a phone number that you can call if you want to fight against harassment. And I can tell you that this number has been called already and some problems have been solved already. Second thing is that we work against stereotypes, and in our communication, everything that is being presented, there's never the expression of a stereotype. It also goes with people, the way people are dressed, and including the hostesses. The parity has been tried to reach in the speakers as well and the panelists. And some of the things that you may not have noticed right away, there is, for example, here, three rooms for babies. This is a first for this type of event. 3 rooms where you can hold, you can bring your baby if they have an issue. Behind you, you have a vegetable wall, and this wall, after the Congress, will be donated to an association that fights against violence against women. So for all of these actions, but I could go even further and name more than what I've done. I am particularly happy because I have a great job that sometimes comes to remind me how things are justified. And if it's not the case, I also acknowledge it. In this case, on the ISO 121, there's no gaps. Everything is consistent. Everything works. So, Mr. Strauss, I have the honor, in the name of AFNOR, to award you your certificate, ISO 121, that is fully deserved. We talked about gender parity, so on the label of gender parity for big events, to the two ladies, I want to award you this label that is also absolutely deserved. Thank you, everyone. The Congress is not over yet, so for all of you who are committed to sustainable actions, so we will be here when we change everything around and we recycle everything. Thank you very much.
I will start my presentation with a short video so that I can make a general description of the topic we're going to address today.
Ce parc, je le vois comme une belle opportunité de se rappeler qu'il y a des choses incroyablement belles qui sont juste là, à quelques kilomètres de chez nous.
Côtoyer de plus près la nature, les animaux, la flore, évidemment essayer de faire attention à la respecter pour que nos générations futures puissent aussi hériter de ce patrimoine forestier si riche et important chez nous. Faire découvrir les arbres vus du dessus, c'est quand même assez extraordinaire.
Moi j'ai dit waouh, génial, on vient s'installer dans cette région, je ne m'attendais pas du tout à ça et il y a un parc national qui s'installe, c'est une super chance.
On ne soupçonne pas la vie qu'il peut y avoir dans les cimes des arbres. Insectes, oiseaux, petits mammifères y vivent, ils trouvent à manger.
C'est le rythme des saisons, c'est le paysage qui est autour de chez moi et que j'ai envie de voir.
J'imagine un monde dans lequel on arrive à prendre soin de notre environnement naturel, ça c'est la base, mais surtout je rêve d'un monde dans lequel on arrive, nous les humains, à s'écouter, à se respecter et qu'on puisse construire ensemble un monde qui nous ressemble, mais surtout qui nous rassemble.
That's a remarkable video to start this session about forest in urban areas and that cover the forest in the mainland that cover 30% of our territory, but also for the forest of the overseas. So we are entering a wonderful world, the world of forest, and that is taken care of by the Forest and Nature Park. And today we are facing a challenge of climate change. We need to protect biodiversity. That's why we want several actors, state and non-state actors, to work towards enhancing the resilience of our forest. Indeed, our forests are already facing climate change and its effects, so we have to make them more resilient. Then today we will hear Dominique de Villebonne. She works at the Forest National Office, which manages most of the forests in mainland France. And we will hear Emmanuel Bichot, the Vice President of the Association Réseau Réserve Naturelle de France, and which is why now I will leave the floor to our first speaker. Could you please launch the slide? Forests are most certainly one of our main reaches worldwide, and that is also the case for France, which has a really rich and diversified forest. So we need to enhance the resilience of ecosystem, and in order to do that, we need to be aware of the services rendered by nature to society, since forests help us capture carbon. And the forests are the first carbon sink in the world, and ecosystem help us preserve assets, humankind, because it prevents catastrophes and marine erosion, along with all the factors linked to climate change. Thirdly, ecosystems help us provide us with the wood we need in our everyday life for our furniture, for energy. This wood is provided through short cycle, which means that we can get this quality resource, and we mine a sustainable resource very rapidly. So that's another service rendered by a forest. And now I'm going to talk about biodiversity. Biodiversity is a reservoir. The forests are a reservoir, biodiversity reservoirs. The bird diversity is decreasing, has been decreasing these past 40 years on the whole territories, but there is a 1.2% increase more generally, and if we turn towards nature reserve, there is a 47% increase of forest diversity for birds. So biodiversity is much more than a reservoir. It is an engine for forest resilience. That's the reason why we cannot build forest trails, forest programs without taking biodiversity into account. And we tend to ignore the diversity of soils, although it is essential for the well-being of the forest. The forests are an ecosystem we all love. And when the lockdown was started, everybody wanted to get back to the forest and to be in nature. Unfortunately, if forests are threatened by climate change, there are some issues with forest deteriorations, or there are also pest attacks. For example, here you can see pictures of bark beetles which attack the trees. And these phenomena are being exacerbated by successive drought. We have more than 300,000 hectares of forest that was damaged by the droughts. However, the year 2020 have seen a heightened risk of wildfire. So climate change are getting more and more intense, are being intensified, and with their intensification, the risk of wildfire is higher. Our organization wants to work within the forest and take care of the health of forests, taking into account the risk involved in order to build its resilience. Now, as for the climate change analysis we carry out, we must go beyond general and traditional models. We should also focus on microclimatic factors, on the forest legacy, on the history of the forest, on the species that were planted. So we need to take all these elements into account when we carry out a climate change analysis. We also need to share the analysis results with other forest managers. We are already working on the different response we can make to face climate change, and our office has created a concept called the patchwork forest. Here is a model, a drawing, and so this concept aims to support ecosystem. In order to do this, we need to work on all the aspects of biodiversity, and especially we need to focus on the species diversity as well as the diversity within the species. We also need to focus on the diversity of territories. We have some areas are regenerating. That is the main development method of our forest, but we have found new essences in other areas, and we mix them with wood corridors. We try to maintain them, to make them age so that they can contribute to biodiversity and bring some hardwood into our ecosystem. We also preserve wetlands, and our office collaborate with forestry workers on a day-to-day basis to preserve the different aspects of biodiversity. We also provide guidance to them. The concept of a patchwork forest is really interesting as for the effects of climate change on biodiversity, but we must be cautious as for the scale at which we work. We also need to take into account the functions generated by this patchwork. Consequently, we need to work as a network. We need to conceptualize our processes as a network. We need to take the deadwood into account. Those are all factors we need to consider. And here on the drawing is a concept called the future parcel. So this is connected to the protected area concept. We face different challenges, genetic diversity and habitat challenges. So this future parcel concept is really interesting. We need to address it, but with caution. Indeed, we want protected areas to be protected from we need to prevent the introduction of allochthone species. So we shouldn't introduce new specific spaces in specific areas. So through the three next slides, you will see pictures and you will be able to take a closer look at the forest we manage. So what does promoting enhancing ecosystem resilience mean on a day-to-day basis? It means that biodiversity is, to us, one of the main engines of biodiversity. It will help the environments to adapt. Environments can change, they can evolve, and they can evolve at a rapid pace, and they will face a growing change due to climate change. So what we want to do here is to make sure they can evolve at the same pace as climate change. We preserve, we protect soils, we protect specific trees that are good for biodiversity. We take into account the different factors such as specific species that must be preserved. What I mean is that forestry workers work on biodiversity on a day-to-day basis and maintain biodiversity or enhance biodiversity.
So the battle for biodiversity will not be only won within protected areas. Of course, we need to extend this network to protect the biodiversity, but it is really the work on the territory that we need to take into account. And that's where the work on biodiversity in the way that we work in the forest is very important. What can be done in terms of dialogue and experiences together between the protected areas and the forest managers is key. Beyond this biodiversity on a daily basis, we also have a number of spaces in which we will practice with other actors, NGOs, actors from the territories. We will try to identify some management principles to preserve a habitat that is rich. At the ONF, we have a strength to assess biodiversity that is quite exceptional throughout 6 networks of experts that cover all aspects of land biodiversity and who have the capacity to study the biodiversity, collect data with other partners to better understand the stakes and address them in terms of management. We collect over 1 million naturalist data in the database every year. If I take the example of natural reserves, we only have 46% of the surface of natural reserve that correspond to free evolution, which means that even within the protected areas, there is forest action and management, hence the importance within the spaces to make territories of experimentation with solutions that are based on nature and based on the biodiversity of essences, the regular forests. So we have a real dialogue to be conducted with the experience we have on protected areas, and that can be done as well with our colleagues from natural parks to conduct together an experimentation that will allow us to move on climate change. So free evolution, what it is? It's a question that comes up regularly, and even more so facing the climate change emergency. What we know is the breakdown of the essences and the areas of preservation and habitats will change. We don't have the possibility to reverse the trend of natural movement of habitats and species. So in the ways of management that we have for public forestry, we have a number of spaces that are left out without any human intervention within what we call islands of senescence, which cover the whole French territory, within future spaces that will identify within the strategy of protected areas that was validated this year. So this free evolution will allow us not to address all the issues again. It's just one tool among others, but it will allow us to observe the evolution processes based on scientific assessments and some works done in partnership with other actors of research. For us, the free evolution has to be studied as a real option in protected areas, as a real option versus, to promote the adjustment to climate change. So there are many spaces that are left to free evolution. It's very important as well for the strategy of protected areas to have reference territories. And in this regard, they can surely play that role. In terms of mitigation to climate change, let's think about the role that can play free evolution. We would like to conclude with Emmanuel. I would like to greet the fact, to applaud to the fact that we have 3 reserves that were listed on the World Heritage List, which is the reserve of the Massane. So it is a real pleasure to see that these reserves can be recognized as UNESCO's World Heritage List. Would like to end on a last slide, which shows the fact that between natural habitat reserves managed by France and the biological reserve managed by the Forestry Department, we have a real heritage of over 100 natural reserves. Of course, we could do better, but it's already quite an achievement. And we can observe the ecosystems and test a few things. Also, we have other devices that are extremely precious to watch ecosystems, including the René Coffort network, which is a very strong scientific network. All the data are absolutely indispensable to face the evolutions that make us dominated by uncertainties rather than certainties. So let's join forces to learn lessons from what we do together. It's what will help us face this huge challenge that we are facing. 30% of protected areas, among which 10% with strong protection. That means that the forest will be part of the extension of the network. It is a very important part of the strategy of national biodiversity. And we will have to look among these choices as well, the diversity of habitats, the diversity of species, but also facing climate change, how we integrate to this network some forests that offer us some reserves of our essences that are already adjusted to climate change. A last point, it's about observation networks. We've observed how they work. We have an observation network on naturalness. And it's very important to connect all these networks, the ones that we steer, that we can steer, that we collaborate to. So since I see François Bonnet, I want to remind him that we work with all the protected areas to establish a good behavior charter. So I hope we can have this done quickly. Thank you, François. Thank you to both of you. Beautiful leads for collaboration. Before we let you go, I would like to ask François Bonnet, who's a delegate ministry to Forest, to join us and conclude this session on forests. Hello, everyone. To begin, I have the duty to excuse Madame Bérangère Abba, who's the Secretary of State in charge of biodiversity, who was delighted to join us today, but who's unfortunately held up, but who will come back to the Congress at the end of the evening. So she asked me to deliver you her words of conclusion. I would like to applaud the quality of your interventions of the manager of public forestry that show that common dialogue is possible between manager of protected areas and forestry manager. The environmental crisis that we're facing obliges us to protect our forests, who are undoubtedly a source of breath for the French people, as we saw during all those lockdowns. And according to the reports published last summer, the IPCC and the IPBES, climate and forestry are closely linked. What ecosystem would better sum up the link between climate and biodiversity than forests? Forests are essential to reverse the trend of the erosion of biodiversity, and they require all our attention. It is the meaning of the Ministry of Ecological Transition in France in favor of forests. This commitment is being made concrete in many ways with a national strategy for protected areas presented in January 2021 that sets the course to have 10% of the domanial forest, which means that belong to the state, under strong protection, and to place quickly 180,000 hectares of the Guyane forest as biological reserves. The new national strategy for biodiversity that will be adopted at the beginning of the year 2022, that will give a key role to the protection of forests. It's also the recovery plan that, of course, allowed 300 million euros, because the Prime Minister has announced another 100 million euros in July to support forest and development of our wood sector, which are an important pillar of our bioeconomy and essential to achieve the decarbonation of several sectors of our industry. And the instances of forest and wood that will be organized with the Ministry of Agriculture and the Minister Delegate to the Industry as of this fall. The exercise will begin in October, early October, in order to promote a shared and balanced vision of the sustainable management of our forests facing climate change. I think that beyond any form of technical debate between specialists, we must all get mobilized to reinforce a dialogue within the society, involve the society to protect those forest space that give us huge services. You've said it very well in your presentation. The management of forest is facing numbers of challenges that are complex. At the time where forests are suffering from climate change and their sustainability for the future generation is at stake, the management principles that were set and that were quite organized are being questioned and will have to evolve. The key word here for the Minister of the Ecological Transition is diversify forestry, diversify essence, diversify the mosaic forest. Madam the Secretary of State wanted to share a commitment with her is that biodiversity will be a precious ally of the forests to win that battle against the climate change and to make sure that we pass on to the future generation living forests. To win this battle, we'll have to keep our reserves of biodiversity, the most iconic of them. I'm thinking about the primary forests before all, and France supports, and the vote hasn't been expressed yet. I think the votes on the motion 115 will be held tomorrow, has supported the motion 115 for the protection of mature forests. We also support the goal from the strategy of the European Union to protect the last primary forest in Europe. And with all the experts in the domain, the ministry has tried to map out these primary forests and subnatural forests to better study them and better protect them. We count on the IUCN, on the OFB, all the actors involved, all the stakeholders to finalize quickly this mapping out, knowing, protecting, valorizing. These are also the foundation of the National Pact of Forest in November 2019 between Champagne and Bourgogne that allows France to have 11 national parks, exceptional territories on a large scale that show the richness of our biodiversity and the natural heritage of France. We also have to greet the ambitious objective to create natural reserves every year, and this is now set in the objective charter of the Forestry Association. The protection of biodiversity goes through a reinforcement of means given to the actors. So since 2018, the government has committed through the recovery plan to reinforce the jobs in national parks, to make sure that we create those national parks for forest by reinforcing the missions of sustainable development. The minister will sign a convention tomorrow in order to validate that. The Ministry of Ecological Transition makes this funding to the ONF from 2 million to 10 million next year for biodiversity. Finally, because the future of the forest is concerning all the citizens, the minister decided that there would be instances of forest of the wood as of the fall. These events will involve all the actors and stakeholders of the forest, industrial of the wood sector, associations, organizations, to have a shared vision, multifunctional for a forest in the diversity of their management plans. To take account the biodiversity will be one of the core commitments of these events that will lead to operational actions. So the members of the social society, stakeholders, already work to take into account the values of the forest, to protect wood and the wood sector. The state will accompany and support this mobilization to have welcoming, productive forest, productive of woods, but not only of environmental services. Thank you for your attention.
I think everything is ready, so we can start this session. First of all, let me thank all the people that came to the French Pavilion to participate in this Congress, and I would like to thank the IUCN to make it possible for us to make a presentation about the Alliance for the Preservation of Tropical Rainforest. I would also like to thank all the online participants. We will now remind you of how this alliance came to be created in the first place. Last Friday, President Macron inaugurated this Congress, and in his speech, he talked about this alliance that has followed the wildfires that affected the tropical rainforest a few years ago. But I will go into detail a little bit later. I'll come back to that. Before that, I would like you to imagine, to visualize the tropical rainforest. Think about why everybody now must mobilize to preserve this forest. And now I'll turn towards Plinius. I'll leave you the floor. He is an expert in ecology, an expert in tropical rainforest. He works in Montpellier. He has worked on rainforest in Latin America in order to understand the impact of human activity on tropical rainforest. He also devised some tools of preservation. He will share with us the results of a study carried out on a tropical rainforest these past 20 years. And now I leave you the floor. I'm not sure how this system works, but good evening, everyone. I will make a brief presentation to tell you about the state of health of tropical rainforest. I will give you general information so that you know where are tropical rainforests located in the world. Then I will give you a definition of tropical rainforest. I will draw conclusions, and I will redirect you towards different documents that help me prepare this presentation. They cover 4 billion hectares. They account for 50% of worldwide forest. So they cover a wide area, and they have a more than 50% of forest carbon footprint. They also account for 1/4 of land carbon footprint. And as you already know, it is a biodiversity hotspot which accounts for 50% of species of the planet. So here are on this picture hotspots of vertebrates. So these hotspots are concentrated in tropical and subtropical areas. There are different kinds of tropical rainforest. There are tropical rainforests, dry tropical rainforests, and tropical forests with swamps that could be submerged. There are also forests with swamps in Africa or in Amazonia. It is not homogeneously distributed since there are mainly tropical rainforests in Latin America. That's not the case for other continents. Tropical rainforests account for half of tropical rainforest. And here is a chart about the evolution of forests around the world. Deforestation affects mostly red countries on this map, and it is estimated that in between the 90s and now there has been a rate of 13 million hectares of deforestation each year. And that's according to a report published by the FAO last year. So deforestation is evolving at a rapid pace in tropical areas, and the trend is inverted in the northern hemisphere. Tropical rainforest has decreased between 1990 and 2020. On the left, there are the losses in millions of hectares, and on the right-hand side, you can see the decline in a percentage of forest coverage. So what we do now is the rate of deforestation, and the rate of deforestation compared to the surface involved, and there are different situations. And if we take Africa, we can see that the Congo Basin has been preserved from deforestation, and Central Africa has maintained an important forest coverage. Here, this graph shows the decline of tropical rainforest, and you can compare different parts of Africa as well as Central and Latin America. So there have been great losses on the American continent. There's something new. We always talk about deforestation. We scarcely talk about degradation. While degradation has reached a record high this past year, it accounts for 10% of tropical rainforest. In 2016, we reached a peak. This curve is a ratio between degradation and deforestation, and in 2017, it is estimated that this peak is due to the El Niño phenomenon that generated heat waves in Asia and Latin America, and consequently, some forests are more affected than others, and the degradation has doubled each year and at a more rapid pace than deforestation. So we need to take into account the degradation factor in the context of climate change. It is crucial we do take it into account because it makes forests more vulnerable to drought and to wildfires. To conclude with, tropical forests are declining as a rapid pace. 7.3 million hectares of rainforest, tropical forests are disappearing. Between 2004 and 2012, Brazil has reduced deforestation in Amazonia. This deforestation started in 2015 and now has reached a record high. Brazil has shown that if there's a will, there's a way to combat deforestation. There have been initiatives to draft a strategy to combat deforestation, and as you know, France imports goods such as palm oil, cocoa, or coffee, and sometimes these goods can be drivers of deforestation. That's why France and Europe have developed initiatives to regulate such imports in order to ensure that they don't come from deforestation. Today, given the current climate change situation, we need to combat deforestation as well as degradation and the illicit exploitation of the forest. Finally, there are solutions, but they need to be built through a common cooperation. We need to make countries who still have a tropical forest understand that it is in their interest to preserve it. So we shouldn't give lessons. We shouldn't point our finger. We started protecting our forests when they started declining. So we need to start a real cooperation dialogue so we reach a win-win situation. This data comes from an article published in Science this year. Some of the co-authors are from the Forest and Society unit, and I want to show you this book. I want to advertise it. It has been written by the unit I just mentioned. It is called Living with Tropical Forests. It is a beautiful book, and it promotes the interactions between humankind and forests. It also tries to provide us with solutions for the future. The more we sell it, and the more likely it will be to translate in Spanish and in English. Thank you. Thank you very much for your intervention, and I encourage you to get this beautiful book, because its content is really interesting, just like the presentation you just heard, and it has a beautiful cover. I'd just like to point out two things. This roundtable is the broadcasters live in Berlin, where there are some very distinguished representatives, and they will take the floor at the end of this session to share their work. I would like to welcome them and to thank them for being here. I am Pierre-Henri Guignard. I am the special envoy for the Alliance for the Preservation of Tropical Rainforest. And now I would like to present you this alliance to remind you its purpose. Next slide, please. The slide will be shown on screen very soon. I need to press the button. Okay, and here it is. Thank you very much. I'm here to speak about the Alliance for the Preservation of Tropical Rainforests. In 2009, there is the G7 in Biarritz, and then President has announced this alliance along with his G7 partners. A few weeks later, in New York, at the Assembly General of the United Nations, the President has announced, along with the President of Colombia, of Gabon, along with the German Chancellor and the First Minister of Norway, they all announced their will to create an alliance so that they can preserve the tropical rainforest in Amazonia, but this isn't the only forest basin to be preserved. We should preserve the forest in Congo or in Southeast Asia. This alliance wasn't created yesterday. It is not new, and it doesn't have any budget. There is no secretariat for our alliance. This alliance embodies a political ambition to use existing mechanism and preserve the rainforest. It means that governments should get together and act together in all international forum, and that forests should be tackled and addressed at each international event. This alliance embodies an ambition for the future. It brings together the international community, as it was the case at the G7 and in the United Nations. But there were great deadlines in 2020, and there will be in 2021. There was this Congress and the COP26 in Glasgow, among others. This coalition is open to all countries who wish to join it, on the condition They accept the principle and objective set forth by the first founding members of the Charter. The Charter you can see on the screen. It was adopted on the 3rd of July 2020 on the initiative of France, Colombia, Chile, and Gabon. There are 6 major objectives that you can see on the screen. First of all, to preserve biodiversity and climate. And it can be supplemented by a crucial element. We also need to preserve health. It is quite evident and obvious nowadays because of deforestation and the diffusion of viruses, just like COVID-19 has emerged a year and a half ago. We need to combat wildfires and illicit activities. I'll come back to that later. I'll go deeper into details. We need to develop a sustainable value chain to make producers and consumers accountable. Producers and consumers haven't waited for us to set up this value chain along with private stakeholders. However, the states encourage them to go beyond their current actions. And a few days ago, the Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs, Jean-Yves Le Drian, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Gabon have committed to setting up a sustainable value chain in Africa. This initiative will be launched very soon in Nice at the Business Forum organized by the Institute Choiseul. Fourth objective, to give each actor its rightful place so that it can preserve soils and forests. And we've been inspired by the work carried out for climate by COP conferences. So the states are the ones who can act. They cannot get results without local stakeholders, those on the ground. That is local communities, and we'll talk about it in a moment. We also need local authorities to get involved. When Amazonia was affected by wildfires, I signed a cooperation convention with 9 Brazilian cooperators so that we can work together and combat deforestation. So the involvement of local authorities is essential. Farmers can play a crucial role. They need to produce more, but also better, and respect the principles of accountability. We need to feed the population. Fourthly, businesses and NGOs can play a crucial role. NGOs can be whistleblowers. They can implement a monitoring action, and they're essential in this field, just like researchers. And what my colleague the presentation you just heard shows how important research can be. I told you we would talk about wildfires in a while, and I'll leave the floor to Stéphane Pallier. He will talk about our objectives in that area. 2 years after the creation of this alliance, there are 31 countries that have joined it. It's not a lot, but these 31 member countries are spread on 5 continents, and they are all willing to commit to the principle and objectives of this alliance. We also aim to bring these heads of state and governments together very soon, I hope, during the COP26 in Glasgow. That would make it possible for us to gain momentum against deforestation. The year 2021 and 2022 will be crucial for us. We need to translate our intentions into actions. We'll follow a roadmap set up with member states. And what sets our alliance apart from other initiatives in that field is that, as you just saw, the alliance brings together countries with forests, but also countries that are donors and countries that receive donations. So what we want is to create a platform for all countries that are located around forest basins. We want the countries from the Northern Hemisphere, the donor countries, to be able to dialogue with them. We will now translate our objectives into actions. I just mentioned the value chains in Africa, but we also bring together international backers for rainforest, and we need each country to act, to be on board. So what about France? We often say that we talk without acting. So now we're going to show you how we're going to translate our intentions into action. The president has announced $100 million to the preservation of the forest. They were earmarked. There were reunions at the office of the Prime Minister, and this funding will help reinforce the commitment of the French ministries, that is the Ministry of Ecology, the Ministry of Economy, among others. France is acting, France is on board and is moving forward along with different stakeholders. And I hope that the next step will be to nominate a co-chair for the alliance. Now, France facilitates for now the alliance, and we hope that the next chair will be a country that has forest. So now we will turn toward the representatives of the scientific communities of NGOs, and now I leave the floor to my colleague who works in the field of human rights, and she will tell you about our collaboration with a distinguished organization and with a civil society organization. We work together to translate French ambitions into actions. That's it for the moment. Thank you for your attention. As I already said, I would like to show you our efforts made to combat wildfires. It is one of the pillars of our alliance, and our alliance has three missions: to creating a platform for forest countries and consumer countries. It is done. Set up a sustainable value chain. They already existed, but we need to promote them and create new ones for Africa. And we just launched an initiative in that matter. And third pillar, to fighting wildfires. Let me give you an example. In 2019, some countries didn't want to receive international aid to combat wildfires. However, other countries called for international aid, and the 1 month and a half. It took 1 month and a half for an expert to go to Bolivia and help combat wildfires. So we need regional, national mechanisms. And Stéphane Payet, the director of environment at the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, will tell us more about this. Stéphane Payet.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. So yes, indeed, as Mr. Seist said, the fires. Sorry, my name is Stéphane Payet, and I am Vice Director of Climate Affairs with the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs for the French government. So I worked with the Ambassador Guignard to create and initiate this alliance for the protection of tropical rainforests. So as Professor Seist said, the forest fires in tropical areas are not a new phenomenon. However, in the context of climate change and global warming and drought, this phenomenon is only going to increase in the next years. So the question of forest fires has been a determining factor to create the Alliance for the Protection and the Preservation of Tropical Rainforest. And it's even its third mission. So the members of the Alliance have taken over the subject, and all of that became concrete with a charter of the Alliance. This constitutive charter was agreed in July 2020, and in this charter it is said that we'll work together to fight the forest fires. So this became concrete in an amendment that is attached to the charter, and this amendment was agreed to in May 2021. In this amendment, we detail the commitments of the member in terms of prevention, preparation, and response to forest fires. So the objective of this appendix are the following. The first one is to show that beyond political commitment, the partner countries want to implement concrete operations and work on the ground. The second goal is to put in place some tools that have an added value versus the previous one in terms of international cooperation, and to reinforce the synergies between the partners. Another goal is to establish a number of guidelines and recommendations, particularly in the 5 following domains: information pertaining to forest fires, technology, transfer of knowledge, fourth pillar training, very important in forest countries, and finally, research and innovation. So the annex was drafted with our negotiations with the following previous number of meetings, and all our members shared their approach and their point of view on the topic, on how to manage forest fires. This method allowed us to adopt an approach that we consider balanced, to establish common principles between all the partners to control and prevent forest fires, but also to restore forests and to give advice to forest countries and train the teams on the ground. The members have also insisted on the necessity to have an inclusive approach, placing the local communities and the indigenous populations at the heart of the discussions. The cooperation will make sure to involve the civil society, NGOs, and the populations. So as of this fall, we will work to implement concrete actions, namely on the prevention of forest fires, and will give special attention to the coordination with local and international associations who already work on the topic, namely at the level of the United Nations, OCHA, the European Union, with a model that works very well, internal at the European Union with the DG Eco, the goal being to work in synergy with all these existing organizations. There is also the idea to work without duplicating the efforts and to scatter our means. Last point, more bilateral, if I may say so, so more specific to France. We have a cooperation with the Ministry of the Interior, 3 cooperants within an activity locally in Amazonia with an expert there, in Africa and in Asia with an expert who's based in Singapore, to see how we can work with these different countries and see how we can act in terms of prevention and training. Beyond the emergency help with equipment and resources, it seems key to us to work on training of local personnel. Since last year, the very specific role has been dedicated to these 3 cooperants, French cooperants, as part of a diplomatic network. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stéphane. This is one of the added value of the participation of the Alliance, because our country, of course, is obliged by its commitments, and the international organizations require this backing from this organization that we're trying to put in place. The Alliance also requires us to work on the ground, not to just be words. And I would like to present to you one of the achievements. Here again, it's in the context of the participation of France with the Alliance. I'm going to give the floor to Herbert Lotz, who's head of the partnerships, international partnerships and conservation for Europe. He's been heading the commitment of governments and partnerships with companies in Europe. As you know, Conservation International is a non-profit association trying to protect the hotspots of biodiversity and the maritime areas. Created in 1997. Its headquarters is in Washington, D.C., and has an activity operations in over 40 countries, mostly in Africa. Herbert will present to us the project Our Future Forest, financed by France in the framework of the Alliance. Herbert, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Je vais en fait continuer en anglais. Je vous remercie de m'avoir présenté de la sorte. On peut faire deux choses. D'abord, je vais vous montrer un peu les progrès que nous avons réalisés depuis que nous avons démarré ce projet. Et deuxièmement, comme l'ambassadeur l'a dit, nous voulons regarder ce qui se passe sur le terrain. Donc, je vais vous montrer une vidéo qui va vous montrer les personnes qui mettent ça en pratique sur le terrain. Donc, si on regarde simplement l'ambition de ce projet et où il se situe, nous sommes, avec le soutien de la France, nous sommes complètement alignés avec les objectifs de l'Alliance de la conservation des forêts, de protéger 26 terres autochtones, et le but est d'ici 2022 de protéger 12% de la forêt amazonienne, ce qui représente 73 millions d'hectares. Donc c'est un croisement entre un travail qui va profiter aux personnes, aux moyens de subsistance, ainsi qu'à la biodiversité et au carbone. Donc, c'est un de ces projets qui porte sur de nombreuses de nos valeurs pendant cette conférence. Ce que je voudrais faire, c'est vous parler de quelques exemples concrets. Je ne vais pas tout vous raconter. Je voulais simplement vous donner plutôt des détails qu'une liste. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'on fait à l'intérieur de ce projet? Ce qu'on veut protéger et améliorer, c'est la gestion des communautés autochtones et de leurs terres. On veut également protéger les générations futures et développer les leaders de demain et leur donner la capacité d'avoir un développement professionnel. On fait travailler beaucoup avec Ecoact. Merci de cette coopération. On veut également identifier une chaîne de valeur durable et des moyens de subsistance durables et avoir des nouveaux moyens de financement qui peuvent bénéficier aux communautés. Et ensuite, le plaidoyer. On veut améliorer le plaidoyer pour l'Amazone, non pas seulement pour le reste du monde en parlant au COP, évidemment assister au COP, mais aussi mobiliser les personnes au sein de l'Amazone pour qu'ils sachent qu'il y a des solutions. Donc on va parler de ça maintenant. Alors ça, c'est simplement un exemple d'un domaine, une zone dans laquelle on travaille avec des populations autochtones et locales pour essayer de les protéger. On parle de la zone de Guané en Bolivie. Donc, si vous voulez vous représenter ce que c'est, moi je n'y ai pas été non plus, donc j'y dois imaginer également. J'imagine un peu une forêt nuageuse qui fournit donc un écosystème. Cette zone est très importante pour les populations autochtones. On est en train de renforcer la diversité avec l'identité de ces communautés, donc ça bénéficie pleinement aux populations locales. Les bénéfices du carbone, si vous regardez le carbone qui est stocké ici, c'est du carbone qui est à 100% irrécupérable. Donc nous ne pourrons pas récupérer si on veut atteindre l'accord de Paris. Et nous voyons qu'il y a une grosse valeur de biodiversité parce que ces lieux contiennent beaucoup d'espèces très importantes, dont l'ours giacoma. Donc il s'agit de la protection de terres et de créer des lieux, des aires qui sont protégés. Vous verrez d'autres exemples dans la vidéo que je vais vous passer. Donc protéger des zones, des aires et des terres est très important, mais ne sert à rien si l'on ne forme pas un groupe de personnes qui peuvent travailler sur ces domaines. Donc avec Voika, encore une fois, je vous remercie. Il s'agit de construire le futur et de faire les leaders de demain. Vous voyez qu'on essaie de former des jeunes leaders autochtones avec des femmes également. Donc comment on fait cela? Comment on obtient ce résultat? On fournit, grâce à le partenariat de plusieurs organisations, avec des talents divers dans les communautés pour que cela profite aux communautés et au gouvernement. Donc on fait des programmes de formation, de la communication et des formations en termes de finances également, ce qui nous aide à travailler avec ces communautés à l'intérieur et à l'extérieur de ces communautés. On voudrait également souligner le fait que les femmes autochtones nous aident à régler certaines questions de parité hommes-femmes et vous allez entendre certaines de ces personnes qui vont en parler eux-mêmes avec leurs propres mots dans la vidéo que nous allons vous passer. Les moyens de subsistance sont également un point très important et la déforestation est un crime en Amazone. Un exemple ici, c'est au Pérou, donc ça c'est la réserve de la communauté Yanesh, où la communauté locale et les familles locales travaillent pour faire pousser du cacao et trouver un cacao de qualité et améliorer sa qualité. Ils y sont d'ailleurs arrivés et ils ont même réussi à amener ce cacao à un salon international du chocolat à Paris. Donc au-delà de cela et de la qualité du travail qu'ils font, parce que c'est également évidemment un cacao qui n'est pas basé sur la déforestation, qui empêche la déforestation, cela promeut également la biodiversité. Dernier élément, c'est le plaidoyer. Donc ça veut dire beaucoup de choses. Dans le cadre de ce projet, ça implique deux choses. Ça veut dire qu'on veut travailler, s'employer pour avoir les personnes qui sont impliquées dans ce projet, qui échangent les meilleures expériences et leurs meilleures pratiques entre eux. Grâce malheureusement, à cause du Covid, ça a été plus difficile. On veut également faire des activités de plaidoyer à l'extérieur et faire assister ces personnes à des conférences internationales et au COP pour qu'ils puissent raconter leurs expériences. À gauche, vous voyez une réunion qui s'est tenue à l'ambassade de France en Bolivie pour travailler avec les parties prenantes et présenter le projet à des ONG. Le problème du Covid, évidemment, c'est que pour ces communautés qui sont isolées, ils ont été frappés encore plus durement par le Covid. Donc on a dû réagir assez rapidement et dans cette communauté que l'on cible, on a travaillé pour leur mettre une connexion solaire basée sur une énergie solaire pour qu'ils puissent rester connectés. Donc ce sont des communautés, on s'est également assuré que la connexion était payée. Ce que ça veut dire, c'est que l'une de ces communautés, qui s'appelle La Palmita, la prochaine prochaine endroit où ils peuvent se rendre est à 70 heures de bateau. Donc ça veut dire qu'une connexion instantanée avec le reste du monde fait une grande différence pour eux au quotidien. Voilà certaines des initiatives et des petits exemples dont je voulais vous parler. Encore une fois, ce sont quelques petits exemples. J'aimerais vous en dire davantage, mais je vais surtout vous encourager à aller sur le terrain et écouter un petit peu ce qui se passe auprès des locaux.
The Amazon rainforest, one of the world's largest carbon sinks and home to the richest biodiversity on the planet, is in crisis. Man-made fires, agriculture, logging, and mining are bringing the Amazon to a tipping point that will have irreversible consequences for people, wildlife, and the planet. Supporting Indigenous peoples and local communities' management of officially recognized territories and ongoing land tenure processes is critical to protecting the Amazon against the threats of unsustainable development and climate change. The project, Our Future Forests, Amazonia Verde, is working with Indigenous peoples and local communities to advance investments and incentives that will conserve up to 12% of the Amazon, about 73 million hectares, in 7 countries by 2025. With funding from the government of France, the project directly contributes to the objectives of the Alliance for the Conservation of Rainforests.
Estamos en la lucha por un mundo mejor, por un planeta mejor. Y es para nosotros de mucha importancia que este mensaje para el planeta, para el mundo, resalte la importancia que tiene nuestra selva tropical más grande del planeta, nuestra madre selva amazónica, que en este momento, por la situación muy compleja que estamos viviendo de no retorno, somos los pueblos indígenas los que tenemos las soluciones territoriales desde la Maloca, desde los pueblos indígenas. Y es por eso que queremos decir que ante esta economía mundial extractivista que destruye nuestros bosques, planteamos soluciones desde el territorio. Y por eso queremos resaltar el apoyo del gobierno francés y el apoyo de Conservación Internacional CI en algunas iniciativas que estamos desarrollando en la cuenca amazónica.
Como mujer indígena Huitoto de la Amazonía colombiana, reconozco el rol fundamental de las mujeres originarias de la cuenca amazónica en la pervivencia cultural, espiritual y territorial para los 511 pueblos. Las mujeres somos vitales en la conservación y protección del ecosistema más estratégico para garantizar la vida en el planeta. Somos restauradoras genuinas del ecosistema estratégico amazónico. Con conservación internacional y a nivel de cuenca amazónica, se está apoyando con becas para la formación y el fortalecimiento de las lideresas que van a continuar con el rol de protectoras y cuidadoras de la Amazonía.
The Women Fellowship Program was recently launched as part of our Future Forests, Amazonia Verde project, providing support to the sustainable initiatives of 24 Indigenous women from the Amazon Basin. Meet some of the fellows.
Nós utilizamos a medicina tradicional para curar os sintomas da Covid-19, então nós não precisamos ir no hospital. E eu percebi a importância desse conhecimento tradicional e esse conhecimento tradicional que está se perdendo. Então, essa é a proposta. Nós vamos fazer com que tenha conexão entre as anciãs do povo Sateré-Maué e as mais jovens. Nós vamos fazer o plantio dessas espécies que são utilizadas na nossa medicina tradicional.
Mi propuesta de este proyecto es reforestar las zonas degradadas de la comunidad para el fortalecimiento del conocimiento ancestral, de transmisión para los niños, para las mujeres.
Con este proyecto queremos mejorar la artesanía utilizando la fibra natural de acá de nuestros bosques, de nuestra chacra y también el tinte natural, y así ofrecer un bioproducto a la ciudadanía. A través de este tejido queremos que la ciudadanía se sensibilice en la conservación de los animales que están en peligro de extinción y también nos contribuye un aporte económico para las mujeres, para las familias de acá de mi comunidad.
And the project that I embark on is planting of crabwood trees, which we see that it will benefit our land and our communities as well.
A few weeks after I took over my position, I went to the FAO, welcomed by our ambassadress, Delphine Boyon at the time, and I was very impressed at the occasion of a luncheon that she invited us at, to hear an African ambassador say to me, everything that you're doing is very interesting and very good, but if it's about putting the forest under a globe, it won't work. Don't forget that forest is a place where you were born, where you live, where you work, and where you die. It's a place where people live. And you've seen that on the video of Conservation International. These people, these local communities, are priority in the project of the Alliance. In order to detail the message that we've already received in the video, and you've recognized José Gregorio Diaz-Reval, he's from Venezuela, from the people of Paco, and he was elected general coordinator of the COICA after the Congress of the Indigenous People. COICA is the coordination of the indigenous people of the Amazonian Basin and was founded in Lima in Peru. And this organization coordinates 9 indigenous associations. And Mr. Mirabal will now talk to us about the help provided by France to COICA in the framework of the Emergency Fund.
I am going to translate. I am American, and Portuguese is going to be a little difficult for me, so please be patient. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of the Congress as well as the government, the French government. I would just add in the room when there was a vote. But first of all, let me mention the motion number 48. It deals with the protection of Mother Earth. It also aims to prevent destruction of Mother Earth. For us, it is crucial that after 500 years, we need to take care of our Mother Earth. And as soon as I got here, I said that this Congress should give birth to a strong voice, the strong voice of Europe. So Europe must have a strong voice, especially the President of France, President Macron. We are happy, we welcome everything that is being done in the Amazon, but it's not enough. More European countries should join these efforts. And this alliance run by Pierre is important. It is crucial that this alliance sees the Amazon as a living organism. Two hearts are missing. The Amazon of Venezuela and the Amazon of French Guiana. We need to work in the whole ecosystem of the Amazon. If one heart of one of the 9 Amazon countries involved is missing, then it's not enough. We trust that the French government will convey a strong message, because it is the worst situation for us. We are going through a pandemic. And during that hard time, the French government has been the only country of the world that directly sent medicines, food to local communities on the Amazon area. The other governments sent aid to our government, while the French government sent us money directly. And this goes for everything we do with forest, and we need to work with what we have now in existing forest. Here at the Congress, there is a motion that is being examined. It is a motion number 129. And we need support for this motion. And we are developing a policy for the right to territories, right to land. And we want to use the example set by France during the pandemics to advance everything we're doing in the Amazon, to save the Amazon. Because of the pandemics, we weren't able to fully implement this project, but now we can. But there's one worry. But we're concerned, we're worried because many of us live in countries that are on a red list for traveling. So it is really difficult for us to travel, and we are asked to do a 20-day quarantine. So it's really hard to take part in these events. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jose Gregorio, for your kind words, and you can count on our full support. And now I think it is quite easy for me to get to the next session. We set up this alliance, and France has initiated a dialogue at the national level. There is the national strategies to combat deforestation coming from imports that is steered by the Ministry of Ecology. There is also the National Group for Tropical Rainforest that is steered under the direction of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And through these two initiatives, we bring together businesses, NGOs, and researchers. And NGOs are concerned for the same reason that Jose Gregorio mentioned. Indigenous people, their defenders and environment defenders face challenges, the same challenges mentioned by Jose. My colleague here is the ambassador for human rights, and along with her, we have decided to initiate a dialogue so that we can work on the rights of environmental defenders. And we partnered with the Netherlands, and we want to be useful, to be more useful. And my colleague here has been nominated ambassador in 2021. She has held different functions over the years. And I can't help remind you that she has she took part in the drafting of the UN Convention on Climate Change. She took part in the Rio conference, and she has been an ambassador of the FAO. So she's really familiar with the topics we'll address today. Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here tonight. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for reminding me the commitment I have carried out ever since I started my career at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a commitment about environment and about human rights today. You have reminded us of our commitment. Everybody has reminded us of this commitment. Environment goes hand in hand with people, the environment, the social-economic context, and so there is a connection with a basic fundamental freedoms. After the war, we didn't really address environment. We only talked about peace and security. But from the Stockholm conference, then in Rio, in Johannesburg, things have changed. And nowadays, at the Council of Human Rights, there is a special rapporteur whose mandate is dedicated to to the right of man to access a safe and sustainable environment. So we have more interaction between environment and human rights now, and you have carried out work in the field of human rights in the Alliance. So we need to focus more on human rights in the environmental debate, because many human rights defenders who work for the environment are murdered, are assaulted, and Global Witness is an association which documents these cases of murders and of assault. For example, in 2019, 212 men and women died in 120 countries, and 3 of them have a record: Colombia, the Philippines, and Brazil. Indigenous people, and thank you for reminding the crucial role played by indigenous people. 40% of indigenous people face these crimes. So we have set a table. We now negotiate with NGOs and environmental NGOs, and work with human rights NGOs to work together to identify mechanisms to implement. There have been solutions that have been mentioned, that have been identified. We need, first of all, to raise the alarm. I mentioned Global Witness, but there is also the Observatory for the Protection of Human Rights, implemented by the International Federation of Human Rights, along with the World Organization Against Torture. We need to develop these alarm systems to know what's happening in the world. I mentioned the special rapporteur on environment in the Council of Human Rights. There are also a legal mechanism with the European Court of Human Rights, who works on these issues. The International Court of Justice now examines environment that can be sanctioned by that can be a crime against humanity. So we need to combat, to punish the criminals. So we need a sanction mechanism at the national and international levels. We can also help NGOs working in the field of environment. And you have mentioned our future forests in the Amazon. There are many NGOs that are active. I will not give all the names because there are more and more of them, but they are here and they work to train and raise awareness among the local population as well as the international community. We also need to protect human rights defenders. We need to protect them in their own countries with providing them with a shelter. We should also ensure their privacy, their anonymity when they need it. We need to foster international solidarity, and on this front, our diplomats must act and raise awareness among governance, condemn assaults and attacks faced by human rights defenders. We need to condemn, to report violations of human rights in the different countries involved. We also need to set up a protection mechanism. That's what Protect Defenders EU does. Together, European countries have decided to protect locally in neighboring countries or abroad have sort of decided to protect human environment right defenders that are attacked. And President Macron wants to strengthen our system for human rights defenders and their protection. There is a program involving lawyers. There are programs with journalists and scientists which aims to protect all those who are committed and who defend the environment and human rights and pay it at the high price for it. We must involve businesses. They have a duty to be cautious. We are working on it at the national level, at the level of the UN. All these actions must be combined so that all those who are committed for the well-being of everyone, for the well-being of our planet, for the well-being of each of us, we depend on the future of the environment. We depend on the future of the rainforest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassadress, for this very important testimonial and for those leads that inspire us on a daily basis. There are two more speakers to come, and I want to remind you that this work for the Alliance is done with very humble means, and I would like to thank Stéphane Paillet, who spoke a moment ago on the question of forest fires, because with his team he's extremely mobilized. And I would like to thank Philippe Delétain, who's our specialist of forest affairs, who's doing a formidable job, and he deserves to be applauded, with, of course, Myriam Gallon, Justine de Bois-Fleury, and the rest of his team. Something makes our country different than others in this alliance, with a different sensitivity than others. It is Guyana. The fact that we are a consumer and donor country at the same time, but also a forest country. We're the only one in this situation. It is a particular obligation for us, and as Bérangère Abba reminded us during a session on the national strategy on the fight against deforestation, France must lead the way and be exemplary in Guyana. In order for you to understand better the French presence in Amazonia, we've asked Pascal Verdon and Arnaud Ancelin, who are respectively manager and vice manager of the National Park of Guyana, to speak to you. We only have a few minutes ahead of us. The park was created in February 2007. This Amazonian Park of Guyana aims at protecting nature and traditional cultures and developing a partnership with local communities on top of the traditional assignments of a national park. It was entrusted to promote the livelihood of the communities and work on a number of achievements socially and culturally within the framework of sustainable development as expressed in the charter of the park. They will expose to you their works now. Hello, good evening, everyone. Pascal Vardon. I am the manager of the National Park of Guyana. Thank you for your introduction, Mr. Ambassador. I will get into details right away. The management of a protected area, the French way, is the model. And we understood that some initiatives are happening beyond the borders, beyond the river Maroni, and sharing experiences at the broader level and outside of Guyana was absolutely necessary. So we will show you an activity that we conducted in the last 3 years on the plateau of Guyana. This is a way to shed light on this part of Amazonia that is less well known, that is at the north part of Amazonia, and its characteristic is that they have all these rivers flowing to the north that are directly linked to the Atlantic Ocean, a very dense river network, tropical rainforest in pretty good condition, but yet submitted to strong pressures, not pressures from forest fires, but illegal forestry. So we want to show you a short video on a project to reinforce the network of protected areas of the plateau of Guyana, and that covers Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. Thank you. You understand that this video was mixing some French Guyana, and Suriname, and was done in cooperation with all the partners of this project. So now we'll just illustrate the stakes and the content. So the perimeter is the one that you have in front of you on the screen. You can see that there is water everywhere and rivers everywhere. And some other projects have seen the light regarding water. I'm thinking about a project called Water Plateau. So we're thinking more along those lines of the Guyana Plateau. 3 countries are concerned. The themes will get to that. And we're at the end of the project that lasted for 3 years. I think I have the clicker for the slides. So Amazonian Park, as a pilot of the project, you see the map. We're located at the south of Guyana. This is over 80,000 square kilometers. It's about the size of Portugal. The Amazonian Park that you see in green represents the size of Belgium. And in dark green, you have an area of strong protection. And the lighter green is an adhesion zone with a population that is not very numerous, but as is there and has many usages with the water and the river and the forest. And we have in our charter all the stakes that are taken into account. So very quickly, an exceptional biodiversity. We can discover new species for Guyana, for science, for the world. Every time we launch inventories of biodiversity, we discover new species. A few pictures with the iconic species that we all know. The Saint-Jatel, the tapir, the jaguar. They still exist in this Guyana Plateau, and a very varied population, Amerindian, the Wayampi, the Teco population, other ones on the coast of Guyana, but we also have populations from African origin who come from the slaves that escaped the plantations in the US. So a legacy from the period of slavery. So you can see these populations, Boni, Aluku, and Creole as well. So it is quite a diversified population. Each of them has their own tradition, know-how, and culture. About 20,000 inhabitants in the south of Guyana, and over 10 languages spoken. So another picture, very rich cultural heritage in the way that they see the world of the visible and the world of the invisible, the knowledge, the beliefs, the traditions, the arts, paintings. As you can see, they do pearls as well, pearl beadings, traditions, dancing, very rich culture. It needs to be preserved and transmitted to the young generations. Unfortunately, we have a big plague, which is illegal gold mining. You see on this picture the effect of illegal gold mining in one of our rivers. I think it's the Moroni River. You can see the difference of color. It's the number of particles and material that are being rejected in the river. And as these material are rejected, the mercury is rejected as well, which is already in the natural sediments of Guyana, but is also brought by the illegal miners as they mine for gold. The forest cover becomes what you see. It's a complete deforestation. It's the degradation of the soil, the capacity of nature to regenerate itself. And you see the size of men. If you could see them on the picture, those are gigantic sites that are completely destroyed. And on the Amazonian Park, we have 150 sites that are very badly damaged, despite the fight against that illegal mining. Another illustration on sites, and I don't want to be too long because I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Arnaud Francin, who will tell us about the project. To go back to the learnings and to the leads for action that we can have to fight against this plague of illegal gold mining, we have a number of perspectives. We have the work that is done by the Amazonian Park, that is part of a whole scheme coordinated by the law enforcement agencies to fight against this phenomenon. There's also a number of solutions that come from cooperation at the level of the plateau of Guyana. We have protected areas where it's still legally possible to see illegal gold mining happen. So we're really trying to keep the integrity of the protected areas, even vis-à-vis these illegal gold mining. The Convention of Nimanamata, who deals with the mercury mining, has a great ground for application because all the stakes linked to pollution by mercury due to illegal mining is there. The traceability of gold as well is part of the global solutions that we can deploy to stop these illegal traffickers in the context of work that was conducted in Guyana by the WWF, among others organizations, to do some lobbying at the national and international level to make sure that we join forces and to translate the resolution of these stakes into international conventions, and also to develop economic activities, other economic activities, because in Guyana, illegal gold mining is due to Brazilian actors, but in other places, it is actually the local communities that may be tempted to do that illegal mining. So it is very important that they have other options in a more sustainable vision. Also, the exchange between the protected areas, the plateau of Guyana, in terms of monitoring, we have a lot to learn, the one from another. And finally, the legal and criminal cooperation is key, because we're dealing with trafficking that is being conducted throughout borders that can be easily crossed. So cooperation between states is key. So since we're talking about cooperation, you can see our news, which is the end of this project, this cooperation project, but there is already an interesting momentum. We had a project carried by the WWF. Then we had the Guyana Shield facility that allowed to organize a number of events, high-level events. Guyana in 2014, in Cayenne, with an event that was organized by the Sepangui, which the former president of this association is in the room with us, and also an event in Maripa, Sula in 2016. So that's to recap this project of cooperation. We reinforced the dialogue and the network. Cooperation in this region is facing two challenges. The language complexity, because from Brazil to Venezuela, we have one different language per 5 countries, and also big difficulties of access, whether it's by plane, to link these different countries. So beyond the question of the illegal mining, and that will be our last slide, we see that and France and Guyana have a lot to learn from neighboring countries on governance issues. These governance issues that were appearing through the previous speakers' presentations give us leads to improve our work and our action on the ground to involve local stakeholders, whether it's elected officials, representatives of local communities. Then we also need to encourage participatory management. This is key to manage natural resources with local communities. We have a project that is coming to an end where we really involved the communities to manage the resources. We hired 7 mediators from the local communities, and they made the assessment with the communities, identified the projects for which they wanted the support of the Amazonian Park. Strengthening capacities among the communities is also a key factor. We need to support the traditional chiefs. We need to have an important pillar of these traditional societies, and they need backing up and reaffirm the importance of traditional chiefs, offering prospects to the young people in terms of employment and trainings. We are looking at very young countries. In Guyana, the population doubles every 20 years, so you can imagine the huge challenges in those territories of the south that are landlocked, where employment is difficult to get. Then we also need to adapt the legal framework to the context, because sometimes it doesn't really reflect the reality of the ground. So Guyana is a type of laboratory. We make experiments in the Amazonian Park. Guyana has some, we gave some very special rights to the local populations. They gave them the right to hunt, to move freely, to fish, even to build villages, and to conduct all their activities in a sustainable manner. Of course, the protected area of such a scale would not have been possible without this attention to the population. So we have to go from information consultant logic to a decision process and management approach. So that's really what we're looking at right now. So this is the goal. The point of this very quick presentation is to give you an overview of the realities and the work that we do in cooperation with a number of partners in Guyana and neighboring countries. It's the occasion to shed a light on this region of the world that is not well known, and yet where we see that there's huge challenges to address. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this presentation. And yes, France is a forest country, and this is an asset. As I said before, we have friends who follow us from Berlin. They have followed the whole session. After working on preserving forests all day, France is here represented by Frank Lacoste. And here we have a connection with Dirk Schneider, the director of Value Chain for Food. He is part of the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, and here he is on the screen. He will talk about the results of an event that took place today in Berlin. Let me take this opportunity to thank our German colleagues who broadcasted our event for all the participants in Germany today. Dr. Schneider, over to you. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to all of you who are in Marseille or online.
Dear colleagues in Marseille and online, thank you for the very good cooperation. This week is special because the forest community started to meet again in presence and continue the discussion about ways to save the green lungs of the earth. Marseille and Berlin are linked in these days by complementary events on crucial questions for mankind. But we were also linked in person since Christian Ruck, the Congo Basin Forest Partnership facilitator, took part in Marseille and then came to Berlin. And Director Philippe Lacoste from the French government was an important speaker today here in Berlin, where he contributed to the Tropical Forest Symposium we held this morning. More than 15 high-level speakers represented a large variety of perspectives on tropical forests. We had inspiring discussions and we all agreed that we must act now. We called this necessity for action the call for a fair deal. We felt that we need smarter forest policies and better governance at all levels, that we need appropriate laws, rules, and standards in the forest countries for products with deforestation risk. We felt that we must ensure equitable inclusion and participation of all stakeholders. And finally, money makes the world go round. We need finance for forests from all sources, domestic and foreign, as well as public and private. And we should also work hard on ending damaging subsidies. What does this mean in practice? Tropical forest countries need to be remunerated for taking on responsibility and for their eco-service to the world. Their responsibility is, as in exchange for this remuneration, they need to increase their commitment towards forest conservation. They need to develop ambitious reform agendas, pursue them consistently, and enforce them effectively. We also need altogether creating economic incentives and improving livelihoods, and all these needs go hand in hand. In this spirit, the Central African states, together with diverse groups represented in the Congo Basin Forest Partnership, have jointly elaborated a declaration which lays out a shared position of the Congo Basin on the protection and sustainable use of its forests. By means of representing not only political views, but the views of a wide variety of stakeholders, this declaration marks an important step forward. This Berlin Declaration regarding the Congo Basin was signed yesterday morning in our ministry. On the other hand, consumer countries, for their part, must stop importing deforestation, also through due diligence regulation and adequate trade policies. Therefore, we strongly welcome the European Commission's decision to develop a legislative proposal on deforestation-free supply chains. From the reaction following our event yesterday and today, we are confident that we will be able to bring this message about the so-called fair deal, or as our minister put it, a global forest treaty, to the two COPs in Glasgow and in Kunming, where the conservation of tropical forests must become a focus of political attention. Germany, as part of the involved donor group in the field of forest protection, will increase its efforts even further and advocate for a fair remuneration of global ecological services at international conferences. Today, we therefore committed 125 million euro to the Central African Forest Initiative, CAFI, and 15 million euro to the newly created Multi-Donor Trust Fund as part of the Amazon Initiative by the Inter-American Development Bank. Also, we will continue to support the Legacy Landscape Fund with further funds as announced in Marseille on Monday. Together with partners, we are preparing an important forest finance pledge for COP26 in Glasgow and hope we can, together with you, through the linked events, both in Germany and France in these days, send a strong French-German political signal to Glasgow. Thank you for your attention. Merci bien.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director General. Thank you for this information. So before we head towards the cocktail, are there any questions? We have the time for 1 or 2 questions. If there are questions, I do not think we will be able to answer questions online, but I think that everything has been really clear. Nobody raises their hand. I think everybody saw the bottles. That was a mistake on our part. But first, let me say a few words to give a big thank you to all those who came forward and gave their testimonials about this alliance. As you see, Marseille, Berlin, as well as the 31st countries of the alliance are here. We are all committed for the Amazon, for the Congo Basin, and a Southeast Asia. It is an important target. We need commitment. That is, we need to be at the major events for biodiversity and take this opportunity to act. It is pressing. We need to act now. So it is federation. This commitment are important. Finally, the third word I wanted to mention is a partnership. As I said before, states won't act without the pressure of civil society and without the cooperation and the commitment of civil society. We must work all together. That's why I would like to say big thank you for the IUCN and Conservation International, because with this event, we show that we can work all together with local communities who are at the heart of this forest action. And we must never forget that in this forest we are born, we live in this forest. This forest is part of a human world heritage. That's the reason why we are here on board and we collaborate. Thank you very much. Please feel free to head to the cocktail now.